Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West, and it's time to get week 85 of the TTT underway with another Middle-earth Map Monday. Now, folks, last week we got our feet wet crossing the Isen at the fords. This week we follow the river north to Isengard itself. We ride now with Theoden King and company. At dawn they made ready to go on. The light came gray and pale, and they did not see the rising of the sun. The air above was heavy with fog, and a reek lay on the land about them. They went slowly, riding now upon the highway. It was broad and hard and well tended. Dimly through the mists they could descry the long arm of the mountains rising on their left. They had passed into Nan Curunír, the Wizard's Vale. That was a sheltered valley, open only to the south. Once it had been fair and green, and through it the Isen flowed, already deep and strong before it found the plains, for it was fed by many springs and lesser streams among the rain-washed hills, and all about it there had lain a pleasant, fertile land. It was not so now. Beneath the walls of Isengard there still were acres tilled by the slaves of Saruman, but most of the valley had become a wilderness of weeds and thorns. Brambles trailed upon the ground, or clambering over bush and bank made shaggy caves where small beasts housed. No trees grew there, but among the rank grasses could still be seen the burned and axe-hewn stumps of ancient groves. It was a sad country, silent now but for the stony noise of quick waters. Smokes and steams drifted in sullen clouds and lurked in the hollows. The riders did not speak. Many doubted in their hearts, wondering to what dismal end their journey led. After they had ridden for some miles, the highway became a wide street, paved with great flat stones, squared and laid with skill. No blade of grass was seen in any joint. Deep gutters, filled with trickling water, ran down on either side. Suddenly, a tall pillar loomed up before them. It was black, and set upon it was a great stone, carved and painted in the likeness of a long white hand. Its finger pointed north. So, we get a description here of the Wizard's Vale, the sheltered valley formed by the southernmost peaks of the Misty Mountains, both what it typically looked like and what it looked like now. After that, the description of the lands surrounding the walls of Isengard. That includes the skillfully laid road, suggesting the road is as old as the fortress and tower within, not built by Saruman. A bit of the Eald Enta Yewerk, and almost a callback to Roman roads. Finally, we get the first of the charming road signs. So, let's go ahead and head into the fortress of Isengard itself. Beneath the mountain's arm, within the Wizard's Vale, through years uncounted, had stood that ancient place that men called Isengard. Partly it was shaped in the making of the mountains, but mighty works the men of Westernesse had wrought there of old, and Saruman had dwelt there long, and had not been idle. This was its fashion, while Saruman was at his height, accounted by many the chief of wizards. A great ring wall of stone, like towering cliffs, stood out from the shelter of the mountainside, from which it ran and then returned again. One entrance only was there made in it, a great arch delved in the southern wall. Here, through the black rock, a long tunnel had been hewn, closed at either end with mighty doors of iron. They were so wrought and poised upon their huge hinges, posts of steel driven into the living stone, that when unbarred, they could be moved with a light thrust of the arms, noiselessly. One who passed in and came at length out of the echoing tunnel beheld a plain, a great circle, somewhat hollowed like a vast shallow bowl. A mile it measured from rim to rim. Once it had been green and filled with avenues and groves of fruitful trees, watered by streams that flowed from the mountains to a lake. But no green thing grew there in the latter days of Saruman. The roads were paved with stone flags, dark and hard, and beside their borders, instead of trees, there marched long lines of pillars, some of marble, some of copper and of iron, joined by heavy chains. Now, after that, we learned that there was plenty of housing built into the walls on the inner side, places for soldiers and families during times of peace, places for Saruman's servants now. But the fortress of Isengard was famed not as much for its stone outer wall, but for the tower that was located in the middle. And that's next. To the center, all the roads ran between their chains. There stood a tower of marvelous shape. It was fashioned by the builders of old, who smoothed the ring of Isengard, and yet it seemed a thing not made by the craft of men, but riven from the bones of the earth in the ancient torment of the hills. A peak and isle of rock it was, black and gleaming hard. 4 mighty piers of many-sided stone were welded into one. But near the summit they opened into gaping horns, their pinnacles sharp as the points of spears, keen-edged as knives. Between them was a narrow space, and there, upon a floor of polished stone, written with strange signs, a man might stand 500 feet above the plain. This was Orthanc, the citadel of Saruman, the name of which had, by design or chance, a twofold meaning. For in the Elvish speech, Orthanc signifies Mount Fang, but in the language of the Mark of old, the cunning mind. A strong place and wonderful was Isengard, and long it had been beautiful. And there great lords had dwelt, the wardens of Gondor upon the west, and wise men that watched the stars. Now, we don't know precisely when the ancient tower was built by the men of Gondor, but there is a passage from Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age that strongly suggests it was in the time of Elendil's reign, so sometime between Second Age 3320 and 3430. After talking about Isildur and Anarion establishing Gondor, we read about Minas Anor, Minas Ithil, and Osgiliath. That's when we get this. These were the chief dwellings of the Númenóreans in Gondor. But other works marvelous and strong they built in the land in the days of their power, at the Argonath, and at Aglarond, and at Erech, and in the circle of Angranost, which men called Isengard. They made the pinnacle of Orthanc of unbreakable stone. So, for nearly 1,700 years, the tower served its purpose, protecting the Gondorian realm of Calanarthon. But after the Great Plague of Third Age 1636, it was closed and its keys were sent back to Minas Tirith. The fortress itself remained occupied by a small garrison of troops led by a hereditary Gondorian captain. Those folks intermingled with the Dunlendings, and sometime in the early years of the reign of King Deor of Rohan, Third Age 2699 to 2718, they became hostile to Rohan. Deor tried to besiege it in 2710, so a little over 300 years back, but to no avail. Later, in 2759, after the long winter, Freyolaf defeated the Dunlendings, and the key to Isengard was given to Saruman. In 2953, Saruman took the fortress itself as his own, and by 2990 was gathering and breeding orcs there. After the War of the Ring, the Tower of Orthanc returned to the possession of Gondor, but King Elessar gave to Ents all this valley to do with as they will, so long as they keep a watch upon Orthanc, and see that none enter it without my leave. Well, that is Isengard and Orthanc, and that wraps it up for Middle-earth Map Monday. Now, yes, I will eventually go back to Mailbag Mondays one of these days, so if you have any questions for me, email them to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Be sure to let Barliman know your question is for today's Tolkien Times. Now, to those of you who support the show on Patreon, thank you. Your support gives me the ability and resources to invest time into researching, writing, producing, and recording these episodes. Now, if you're not yet supporting the show, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes. There you can join the TTT Content Council to get input on what I'm going to talk about each series, get a bonus episode every week, and more. And then, folks, please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we continue Turin Turambar Tuesdays. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the TTT in your podcast apps. And for those of you on YouTube, subscribe to the channel to get all of the PPP productions. And be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.